On September 11th, 2001, the terrorist group Al-Qaeda made an attack on the United States that would prove to start a long journey towards freedom. By their acts of terrorism, Al-Qaeda awakened the sleeping giant that would ensure their evil deeds did not go unpunished. War may be fun to wage in video games, however, in reality, it's a very serious action to take. When one wages war, one has to sacrifice much in order to gain much. The war on terrorism was declared in an effort to gain safety from terrorists. In order to better comprehend the war on terrorism, you need to know what it is, what some of the major events are, and the effects of the war. So first, in order to understand the war on terrorism, you need to know what it is. The war on terrorism was declared on September 20th of 2001. It was declared by the current president of that time, President Bush, to Congress as well as the people of America. This war was declared on Al-Qaeda, namely, because of the events on 9/11, as well as all terrorists around the world. As President Bush mentioned in his speech, he said, "Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there." So what is a terrorist? According to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, a terrorist is an advocate or practitioner of terrorism as a means of coercion. So what is terrorism? Well, also according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, terrorism is the use of violent acts to frighten the people in an area as a way to achieve a political goal. As you'll notice with these definitions, neither one of them includes any type of demographics like cultural background or race or gender or religious beliefs and things of this nature. They're quite broad. This means that anyone, regardless of those demographics, if they are committing acts of terrorism, if they are instilling fear in the public for, as the definition says, a political goal, then they are terrorists and they are committing terrorism. And therefore, they make themselves enemies of those fighting in the war on terror against these evil deeds. Some specific individual terrorists that you may be familiar with are Saddam Hussein, who was the dictator of Iraq, as well as Osama bin Laden, who was the former Al-Qaeda leader. The war on terror was declared because of, as I mentioned earlier, it was declared because of the events that happened on 9/11. The goal of the war on terror is to eradicate terrorism from not only the United States, but the entire world. President Bush said in that same speech to Congress and the American people, "It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated." Now that you know what the war on terror is, you need to know some of the major events of the war. So the start of the fight took place in Afghanistan on October 7th of 2001. This was the first combat moment of the war on terror, but it also was the start of the war in Afghanistan, which was a war within the war on terror. Other significant events of the war on terrorism include the invasion of Iraq, which took place on March 19th of 2003. Fast forward 13 years from 2001, and the war in Afghanistan officially comes to an end on December 28th of 2014. Enemies killed, imprisoned, and other things of this nature include Saddam Hussein, who was executed in Baghdad on December 30th of 2006 on the charges of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. Osama bin Laden was also killed by United States Special Forces in Pakistan on May 2, 2011. There were other high-level Al-Qaeda members that have been killed or captured in the course of this war. Thousands of suspected terrorists were apprehended and held in order to prevent terrorist attacks from taking place. The Taliban was also upended. Now that you're aware of the major events of the war, you need to know some of the effects of the war. So there are domestic effects, and I'll be talking about domestic effects in terms of America and the United States. And there are also international effects that come from the war on terrorism. So first, the domestic effects. The war on terrorism and the events of 9/11 certainly changed some of the things that we do in America, the life of Americans. Additional security departments were put in place, for example, like the Department of Homeland Security. Military spending was increased to accommodate the war on terrorism. Increased public safety and security measures have a large impact on the American people in their daily lives. We all know, or at least have heard about, the process of going through customs at airports. It can be quite a long process and quite a tedious one, but it's all there to ensure our safety. So stricter security in areas such as airports and along borders are a couple of examples. The course of action taken to alleviate emergency situations also underwent improvement. New laws were also put in place, like the USA Patriot Act. The main goal of this act is to discourage terrorists from attacking and bring to justice those who commit such acts within and beyond the U.S. borders. Now on to the international effects. As with most wars, there are casualties in the war on terrorism. Since the start of combat and all the way to January 22nd of 2020, the U.S. soldiers who died in Iraq and Afghanistan numbers 7,013. The estimated number of Iraqi civilian casualties that occurred from 2004 to 2007 is on average over 200,000. According to Statista Research Department, the most Iraqi civilian fatalities occurred in 2006. The number of deaths recorded was 29,517. Locations that were affected were Iraq and Afghanistan. Once Iraq's government was overthrown and Saddam Hussein was overthrown, their dictator, the people needed a government. However, without proper government construction and due to other factors, the country fell into civil war. Also in Afghanistan, the Taliban formed once again and became the leaders of an uprising in that country. Now that you're aware of what the war on terrorism is, some of the major events of the war and the effects of it, hopefully you can better understand the fight many men and women have been devoted to. The war on terror has been a long war filled with ups and downs, but all of it has been endured for the sake of freedom from terror.